as a chaplain at the hospital, I once had an engaging conversation with a couple, and we talked about life, and in the course of a conversation, we now began to talk about the Ten Commandments, and in the course of this conversation, the man told me that he keeps 4 of the commandments, while the wife keeps 6 of the commandments. So while he keeps 4, the wife keeps the rest of the commandments. And I went further to really ask why that was the case. Well, I didn't ask them to give me the details of those commandments. But so why would you keep 4 and the wife would keep 6? And then he told me that what God has joined together, let no one divide. And he had to pass the ball to my court. It's like, Father, you preach this to us, that what God has joined together, let no man divide. So when he keeps 4 commandments, he keeps 4 commandments on behalf of the wife. And when the wife keeps 6, she keeps 6 on behalf of him. So they have been joined together, and no one will divide them. That is so interesting. Well, I ended up telling them, you guys are partners in crime. We have the 10 Commandments today, and these 10 Commandments constitute the very foundation of our moral life. The moral life is about the good life, the good we have to do, the evil we have to avoid. So we see the moral life in the 10 Commandments, and Jesus Christ will summarize these 10 Commandments into 2, love of God and love of neighbor. So it means that love is the spirit of the law. Love is the spirit of the 10 Commandments. And when we reflect on the need for us to love ourselves and the need for us to love God, then we may want to really ask ourselves another question: what exactly could be the opposite of love? What is the opposite of love? Hate. I knew you were going to say that. Hate. Well, I would have said that myself, that if I have come to realize that the opposite of love is not just hate, it is use. To use. That sounds strange. To use someone is the opposite of love. In fact, when you use people as means to an end to achieve your selfish interest, it is an expression of hate, but it comes to the way of use. You're using them. You are robbing them of their dignity, of their freedom, of their humanity when we use people. That is the opposite of love. And we'll come to see how that applies to the gospel of today. And when we'll talk about abuse, so you have use, you have abuse. Abuse is the extension of use. So when Jesus approached the temple, when he walked into the temple, he was angry. In fact, he was enraged by what he saw. Jesus was angry. And that is so consoling to hear, that even Jesus was angry. So it is not about us getting angry. We all get angry. But the question is, what do we do with that anger? That's the question. Yesterday, I shared my experience. I am doing an online program, and I submitted one of my assignments late submission. And because of that, they deducted 10 points from me. 10 points. I wouldn't know if you've experienced this before. You know how it feels? I was angry. Very angry that they deducted 10 points from me. So what did I do? I vowed I was going to read. I was going to read so well, and that I would score a very high A. And that I did. I never took anything for granted. No chances anymore. I just had to sit down and to channel my anger towards getting A, and not just A, very high A. So the point is, how do we use our anger? We get angry when we are faced with evil, when someone offends us, when we are faced with injustice. We get angry. So what do we do with that anger? So do we use anger positively or negatively? So in this gospel, we see how Christ used anger positively. What did he do? He chased away the money changers and upturned their tables. And I also asked another question: what would Christ have done if Christ were to walk into the church today? What would Christ have done? If Christ walks into the church and he finds a church at prayer, if Christ walks into the church and he finds a church that promotes justice, peace, righteousness, accountability, if Christ walks into the church and sees a church that enthrones the values of God's kingdom, definitely, he will tell us. I mean, he will tell us, well done, good and faithful servants. He will say that. But if he walks into the church and finds a church that enthrones money over salvation, if he walks into the church and finds a church that enthrones, that places political correctness over the truth, if he walks into the church and finds a church that enthrones, exalts abuse over love, he will do exactly what he did today in the gospel. He will cleanse. He will cleanse. And I so believe, my dear friends, that what is happening in the church today is a divine cleansing. That is the hand of God upon the church. As painful as it is, as traumatizing as it is, but there is a divine cleansing that is going on. Because this is the church of God. And we approach this temple and we ask the question, why did Jesus Christ chase away the money changers? We have to understand that these money changers were not just money changers, they were men of authority. They were men that had power, they had privilege. So what they were doing was an abuse of their power, an abuse of their privilege. They desecrated the temple for their own selfish interests. But this is the point, because in the temple, they had the court of the Gentiles. So when King Herod renovated the temple, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, then the second temple was built by Ezra and Nehemiah. Now King Herod was the one who renovated the second temple, beautified it, and it was so beautiful. And then if you walk into the temple, you come to see that it had 3 compartments. The first one was the Holy of Holies, the second was for the Jews, and the third one was for the Gentiles, the court of the Gentiles, the external court. Now, that was where these money changers found themselves. They occupied the court of the Gentiles, and by doing that, they prevented the Gentiles from having access to the temple. So when Christ chased away the money changers and upturned the tables, what did he say? He said, you do not turn my Father's house into a den of thieves. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. Underlined it, for all the peoples, not for the Jews alone, not for the priests alone, but for all peoples. Because what they were doing was that they prevented the Gentiles from having access to the temple. It is not in our place, my dear friends, to prevent people from God. Why are we Christians? Why am I a priest? It is not to prevent people from coming to God. It is not to separate people from God. It is to build a bridge We are called bridge builders. We are to build a bridge to connect people to God. That is why we have this vocation. That is the essence of the church. Not to separate, not to divide, but to unite, to bring people to God. But that was exactly what these money changers were preventing. They denied the Gentiles their place in the temple. And we could see the rage, the anger of Christ. And imagine when we deny people that access to God. You could imagine the anger of God upon us. And when Christ was able to achieve this, when he drove them away and upturned their tables, he told them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will build it up. But let us come to understand, the sins they committed, because today we have the 10 Commandments, and when we come to see what the money changers did in the temple, we come to see how their actions could apply to 3 of the commandments. The first commandment says that He is the Lord our God, and we should have no other God besides Him. But that was exactly what the money changers did in the temple, because they were lovers of money. St. Paul says that the love of money is the root of every evil. So what were they doing? They had a god, money. Money became their god, and they, for the sake of money, they desecrated the temple. We have to reflect on this, my dear friends, and ask ourselves, do we have other gods besides Him? What exactly is it that is taking my whole time and preventing me from having a relationship with God? That is the God I have in my life. It could be money, it could be food, it could be pleasure, whatever it is that is occupying that space in my life and denying me access to God, preventing me from being a Christian, from having a relationship with God. That is a God in my life. So what exactly could be your own God, your own little God that you worship in the place of the ultimate God? The second sin they committed was that they were taking the name of God in vain, because they actually desecrated the temple, and in the name of the temple, they were making their selfish, and they're trying to achieve their selfish interest in the name of God. So to take the name of God in vain is to use the name of God. Like I said, the opposite of love is what? Is use. So to take God's name in vain is to use God's name, to abuse God's name, and to use that name for our own selfish interests. That is what it means to take God's name in vain. It is to try to manipulate God. Want to manipulate God. It's like those who use religion to manipulate people, for instance. Those who tell lies in the name of God. That is taking His name in vain. We are not to take the name of God in vain. We are not to use religion to manipulate the people. We are not to use our religion, to achieve our selfish interests. The third sin they committed was that they were stealing. They were lovers of money, and they inflated the prices of what they sold in the temple, and by so doing, they stole from the people. How do we apply that today in our context? What does it mean to steal from God's people? When I deprive you access to God, I am stealing from you. When I deny you access to God, I am stealing from you. And that should not be the case. Now, Christ today is saying that He will destroy the temple and He will rebuild it in 3 days. And He was referring to the temple of His body, His own body. And that is the point, my dear friends. Because the temple of God today goes beyond the physical structure. The temple of God is the body of Christ. You and I, my dear friends, we make up the temple of God. So how do we rebuild this temple? Now we go back to what happened last Sunday. Wasn't that a beautiful celebration? 6 black Catholics on their way to sainthood. That was a beautiful celebration, that we all came together to pray, to speak truth to power, to promote the cause of holiness and righteousness. That is how we rebuild the church. We are going to have the scrutiny, and we have more people come into the church. The church is growing in leaps and in bounds, but it is not just about having more people come into the church or who receive the sacrament. It is about understanding what it means to be members of the body of Christ. And that is how we rebuild this church. Because I tell you, my dear friends, it is now in our hands to lead the church the way God would want her to be. And I tell you that the elements that bind us together, that unite us, they are more than the elements that divide us. Let us emphasize on those elements that bring us together. That is how we rebuild the church.